everyone. Hi, welcome to No Patient Left Behind's latest webinar. Our webinar today is called Bargain or Barrier: How Global Drug Pricing Affects U.S. Patient Access and Affordability. I think we might still have a few people joining, but I'm going to go ahead and get started since we only have an hour, and this is a topic that could take many, many hours. So listen, I'm Heidi Wagner. I am actually on the board of No Patient Left Behind. And for those of you who aren't aware, No Patient Left Behind is a not-for-profit working to advance really common sense policy solutions that really focus on affordability of drug prices for patients, but also make sure that in so doing that we're also still encouraging innovation. Today, we are actually going to be tackling one of the most controversial drug pricing policies that's actually been discussed to date under this administration, and it's called most favored nation pricing, and also sometimes referred to as international reference pricing. I actually was asked to moderate because for the better part of my career, working on behalf of the biotech industry, I actually was responsible for negotiating funding agreements globally. So with other governments seeking to potentially fund or not fund products that we were actually offering for patients. And I realized in practicing and in actually preparing for this that I was asked to moderate and rather than be a panelist, because I have a tendency to really go on and on and on about this topic. So I think this is in part a way to kind of keep me a little bit under control. But let's even though my experience and perspective really comes from really the pharmaceutical side, we are very, very fortunate today to have panelists that really look at this issue from the patient side, which is really the point of the discussion. So let me introduce them before we get started. We have Heidi Floyd, the other Heidi on the call. Heidi is a breast cancer patient and advocate with firsthand experience navigating other countries' healthcare systems. She really is going to be able to talk about what this means to a patient very, very specifically. Second, we have Michael Renato. Michael is a passionate multiple myeloma advocate, coach, and mentor for cancer patients. He helps others navigate access and affordability issues using his experience to guide others through their myeloma journeys. And he's very involved on issues with Capitol Hill. So he's also very in the know in terms of this issue, but also how to advocate. And finally, last but not least, we have Sue Peshin. Sue is president and CEO of the Alliance for Aging Research. Sue has been among the leading voices raising concerns about MFN and IRP policies. She's mobilizing patient advocacy organizations to do the same. She'll help us understand not only why this policy raises concerns generally, but why it could hit the aging population more specifically. And as you all know, the aging population relies most heavily on Medicare. So together, we're going to break down both what MFN and IRP policies really are. We really want to help understand the trade-offs of introducing these policies or enacting these policies in the US, and then also how your community can get involved. But before we actually get started, a quick reminder, housekeeping reminder, this session is being recorded. So you are able to revisit and share it afterward from our post-webinar resource hub on the MPLB website. We'll have both chat and live Q&A open throughout. So please feel free to jump in, react, ask questions. We also have saved time at the end for some Q&A. So with that, I want to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to hand things over right now to Sue Peshin to talk about the costly realities.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Heidi. Thanks for having me. I also just want to note I'm a family caregiver to my mom, who has Alzheimer's, arthritis, and kidney disease. So just want to mention to everybody, because family caregivers are definitely as much a part of this dialogue as patients are. We're all in this together. So the push for these most favored nation policies, or MFN for short, policies, They stem from President Trump's well-founded frustration, really, over Americans paying higher prices for prescription drugs here in the United States than patients pay abroad. So it really is true. We do pay more here. And there was a 2024 study that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services found that for every dollar paid in other countries for drugs, consumers in the U.S. pay about $2.78. And that gap is really starting to widen over time. So it's a real pressing issue for patients in the United States, and we can't ignore it. And so a lot of different people are trying to solve it, and that's a good thing. But MFN, from our perspective as a solution, and we're going to get into this a bit more throughout this webinar, is really an imbalance, and it misses a key difference between the United States and other countries. And it's going to unintentionally result in worse access to care for patients, which is really where the rubber hits the road. You definitely, we all want lower out-of-pocket costs and lower prices on everything that we have to buy, but we want to be able to have access to it. And certainly healthcare, there's nothing more important. So in the next slide, getting into our topic for the webinar today, there's been a lot of political discourse over this. And so some of you who are watching may have seen things in the news about how the administration is hoping to address this problem. And as I mentioned, most favored nation is how it's referenced. And it's under a larger policy umbrella that's called International Reference Pricing, or IRP for short, that Washington, D.C. loves. We love an acronym. So International Reference Pricing is really, it's a policy framework that compares drug prices across countries. And these are other developed countries, so they're relatively wealthy, but a lot of them have single payer systems, meaning the government pays for health care. And as a result, they use their system, their international reference pricing, as a cost containment tool. It's something that, instead of letting the free market set prices like we do here in the United States, they benchmark against what other similar type countries pay for their medications. And as a result, a lot of the bulk of the pricing ends up being on the United States. But there are trade-offs to that, and we're going to talk about that, including basically getting more drugs and being able to get them faster in a faster period of time. So patients in the United States are able to get access to medications much, much quicker than in all these other countries that right now we're sort of taking a look at to set prices against. Now, some countries set their price for a drug to match the average price across a group of countries, and some use the middle price or the median price, and some use a mix of factors like their economic conditions, and then some use the lowest price. They just take the strictest version, and that's really like, what's the bargain basement price? MFN is the minimum price version. And that's really the U.S. saying we're only going to pay what the lowest paying high income country pays, not the average, not the middle, the lowest. And that sounds great. But the part that the general public doesn't generally see is in terms of the way medicines are priced today. And when you hear tie pricing to other countries, it feels like a really good idea until you understand the trade-offs. And one of the main trade-offs I want people to walk away from is this is really about saving the government money more than saving patients and families money. And underlying the debate in the United States in particular is this assumption that other countries value the latest and greatest medicines the same way we do, and that those countries would pay more if prompted. So this whole idea of like, we're going to even the scales, but that's not really true, unfortunately. Other health systems, foreign health systems that rely on price controls, they also rely on rationing care. So they have care in sort of like a pie, and they set a budget each year. And part of that budget means denying or delaying access to newer treatments. And that's a very different mentality than what we typically have had here in the United States. And while it seems really reasonable on its face to have this price competition, it would have a negative impact on companies that have newer or more innovative products on the market, which is where people are able to get access to them here in the United States. And you probably have heard of people from other countries that fly to the United States, that go to the Cleveland Clinic, that go to Mayo, because they can get things here that they can't get in their home countries. And it's oftentimes for the things that are the most challenging diseases, like rare diseases, neurodegenerative diseases. And so when you add this as a policy on top of what companies already have to do with insurance companies to become a part of insurance plans, it's going to make them have to cut their research and development budgets. And that means less cures and less treatments for all of us moving forward. So it's penny wise, maybe for the government. It's pound foolish, really, for patients and families.
That's great. No, I really, I have to echo exactly those comments, Sue. Being in the position of actually negotiating before, I mean, the alternative really was that patients would not get the products, and in some cases, life-saving products, unless they conceded to really what the government's demands are. The notion you can actually negotiate with a sovereign entity is false. Moving ahead, we really wanted to just kind of highlight that this debate is very effectively put forth as a fight between the administration and drug companies. And that's kind of an easier way to look at it. But in reality, as Sue very deftly explained, it's really about ultimately what happens then to American patients and to providers. So even though it's set up as this is just about getting the drug companies to charge less, the reality of it is that none of the policies that are talked about right now in the US actually would ensure that patients actually benefit from any kind of lower price that the government might receive. We're hoping to change that a little bit by bringing you all into this discussion, but wanted to really start with a bit of a myth and fact question. So, question for you all: adopting other countries' prices in the US will save American patients money at the pharmacy counter. Very curious to know your thoughts. So if you have a chance to, in the comments section, let us know kind of what you think about this, and we'll see kind of if in fact, the rhetoric of it just being about drug prices and the pharmaceutical companies resonates. I don't know that I'm seeing a lot of comments. Yeah. Anything more? I'm seeing a few. And not surprisingly, we have very different views about this. And it is a very difficult, well, it's on its face, I think it's actually quite difficult. As Sue really pointed out, it does seem intuitive that no, we shouldn't be paying more than other countries, but it's so much more complicated than that. And part of what she got into explaining was that our healthcare systems are very different, so the comparison is not necessarily fit for purpose. And so that's, I think, a really important thing to to highlight. In addition to that, we wanted to get into kind of really explaining more kind of the elements and the components of pricing, so that maybe this will actually help clarify some of the myths and the facts. So, okay, so we've got the list price, the net price, and then the patient cost. So obviously, and this is true ex-US as well, that a pharmaceutical company will set its list price for the drug. But that's generally not what an insurer pays, and it's also generally not what another country pays. There's a negotiation that can take place over a variety of elements, and ultimately, the net price is what the government will actually pay. Now, the interesting thing is will that price actually be published or not? And that's another thing that is not really factored into this. A lot of what the whole concept of international reference pricing ultimately kind of encouraged over in Europe is the lack of transparency, to be honest. There was a lot of discussion about, okay, we'll give you a good deal, but don't list that deal publicly so that we're not bound by that within another European country. So it creates, this notion actually creates a lot of unintended consequences that ultimately negatively impact the patient more so than it impacts the company. So changes to government pricing alone does not actually lower prices to the actual patient. And that's just something that's really important to understand as we're going forward. And I would say, from my perspective, that kind of busts the myth that in fact, this is better for patients. Okay, so moving along, we want to also talk about just the apples and oranges, as I mentioned, the difference in kind of the healthcare systems and what we're facing. So I'm going to actually hand this over now to Michael Renato and to Heidi Floyd.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Appreciate that. Other countries value their systems totally different than in the US, and we have to decide, does it make sense to import other system prices into the US? And do we really want to? Nothing in this country is free. I mean, you have to think about that. I mean, free lunch always comes with other things attached to it. But every country has to decide how they want to pay for their healthcare systems. And in so many different ways, in a universal system like the UK or Canada, the government decides, really what the drug is worth. But in the US, it's completely different. We talk about how it affects the patient and how things are important. Going back to the UK and Canada, they use a thing called QALY, quality adjusted life year, which personally I totally detest as a myeloma patient because it values your life from 0 to 1. And obviously a disabled person is valued less than a person who's totally healthy. I think back just a few years ago to the QALY board actually denying a myeloma drug because it gave the myeloma person 18 more months worth of life, but yet they didn't think it was worth the $365,000 that it would cost. Yeah. So it's so important to think about, do we really want to bring MFN into the US system? We think about different things about, think about how fast a drug comes to market here. It comes to market here typically like 3 months versus 3 years somewhere else. And that makes all the difference in the productivity and the believing that the person can actually be a productive person in society. They can pay taxes. They can do other things. They could be a father, a mother, all those different things. We can do that. So I'm going to turn it over to Heidi now, the other Heidi. Comment too.
Heidi in Atlanta. Okay, I'm checking in. So my experience has been pretty, maybe not unique, and that's kind of the disturbing part. So I lived in the U.S. the majority of my life when I was diagnosed with breast cancer originally and was assigned a chemotherapeutic that I was taking here in the U.S. We did have to move to another country for 2 years. Oh, it was in Canada. When we moved, I immediately went to the pharmacy and said, "Here's my prescription. Can I please get this medicine here?" And he said, the pharmacist replied, "Yes, absolutely. We just got that in." And I thought he meant we just restocked. I'm like, "Oh, great timing." And he kind of, we kind of had that odd exchange. And he clearly knew that I didn't understand what he meant. He said, "No, I mean, we just got this medicine. How long have you been on it?" And I said, 3 years, knowing that it had been available in the US for 5 years. So I had been on it for 3. And he said, "So just so you understand, this medicine has been available in your country for 5 years." I said, "Yeah." And he said, "It only just became available this month. They wait to purchase until it's the right price." And so I kind of stood back trying to understand the enormity of what he was telling me. And then he just said, clear as day, "Think about the number of women who have died in this country waiting to get that drug, and they couldn't. And they could literally look across the border and see that it was available for other people, but not for them." And that has, to this day, I have like goosebumps when I think about that, because he took the time to explain to me the difference in our healthcare systems. And no healthcare system is perfect, but oh my goodness, the importance of having these drugs available to everyone is just crucial. And
I think that's a common theme outside of the US, which is access is generally delayed. And that's for many reasons. One is that just because a drug is approved for safety and efficacy, for example, by the EMA or up in Canada, that's just the beginning then of the discussion as to whether or not patients can have it. We're not used to that here. Once a product is approved, now again, like you said, Heidi, it's no system is perfect, but in general, access is made available. Affordability is an issue here for sure, but there are patients in other countries that have zero access. We have a great little video that we want to kind of also play here that talks to what you were just saying.
Yeah. Before we start that, I just want to say,
I'm sorry.
No, that there are entire continents that have been avoided deliberately, and that's something worth noting. Like it's not just one little country or another; it could be an entire swath of land. So
you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
I want to sit there and tell my little boy that mommy couldn't get you this medication. No parent should ever have to do that, But yeah, I'm here again, the same as last year, to ask the HSC. They are meeting, the drug group is meeting in June, to just ask them to not delay this anymore. Time is muscle for our little boys, and every day that they don't have this medicine, their muscles are dying. So please just help our boys and don't delay this any longer.
Well, and I can tell you from the pharmaceutical perspective, these kinds of things are agonizing. We really stand in the shoes of the patients trying to ensure that they have access to the medicine. But we also look at the value that we're providing to the patient, and why is the value any different in England than it is here in the US? And so, there's a lot of discussion and a lot of negotiation that goes on. And I think from the patient perspective, it may be easy to say, well, just concede to what it is they want. But maybe now you're getting a little bit of a flavor of some of the trade-offs that are really required. The other countries in Europe then will look to a country like England, and then it could really start what we call, kind of just a waterfall down in terms of ultimately pricing that can have other negative ramifications. But access and the concerns about access are a real thing.
Yeah, Heidi, I want to jump back in there on the access issue. There are several European countries that still don't have the number one myeloma drug that's used all the time. It just doesn't exist, that the government says, no, it's not worth it. And that's tragic. Yeah.
Let's talk about the second issue, the discriminatory metrics. And Michael, I think, or Sue, actually, you were going to actually speak to this.
Sure. And I mean, this trade-off definitely hits my community, older adults, but it also hits people who are sick and people who are living with disabilities, which are, we're basically talking about everybody who needs good health care, right? This is why we pay into a lot of these systems, both public and private. And Michael touched on this, and definitely, want to reiterate what he said, is that quality assessments, which are really traditional cost-effective analysis systems, they assign a financial value to the patients for whom a given treatment is intended. So if you're sicker, older, or you're disabled, your inherent value is less. And so when you apply this to healthcare decision making, the results can mean that some patients, people with disabilities, veterans, seniors, they're deemed too expensive to receive care. And this all started in the 1960s when the British government was searching for ways to ration care for the National Health Service. This is actually when organ transplants started to come online. And so it's an important premise to recognize that if we embrace MFN or international reference pricing, we're embracing healthcare rationing. And rationing in European countries hasn't only resulted in access issues, but it's also translated into higher mortality, particularly in areas like cancer. And it also goes against longstanding U.S. values and U.S. law. Our Americans with Disabilities Act and the Rehabilitation Act, these were passed decades ago. It ensures that people with disabilities and sick people would not be excluded and could not be discriminated against in any kind of program in the executive agencies, including Medicare. And the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was passed in 1990, it extended that protection to programs and services offered by state and local governments. So that impacts Medicaid. And as part of the Affordable Care Act, which was more recently passed, there was a specific ban on use of QALYs in the Medicare program for coverage or reimbursement issues, specifically because it discriminates. So, long story short, this is just bad policy. It's just sort of deciding who we want to be as a country, because when we're importing a policy like this, we're importing what goes along with it.
And that is so spot on, Sue, because then I think that's something that is missed in this debate, which is we do have different systems. I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but we have thus far opted to not ration availability of care and products based on things like, you're older, you don't have value to society. And just a reminder, QALYs means quality adjusted life year. And so they're really trying to impose a mathematical equation on your value to society. And again, having negotiated, we've tried to get them to take a more expansive look at what is value, and it was been very difficult, actually impossible, to get these countries to actually think of it differently. So it's a very rudimentary mathematical equation that really misses the point of a person's life value. Are they active members of society? Are they contributing members of society? Are they taxpayers, et cetera, et cetera? So I think Sue nailed it in terms of just the discriminatory practices. But I really just want to emphasize our healthcare systems are decidedly different. And as a result, something that sounds really attractive is really not fit for purpose for our kind of system. Trade-off number 3 is really, really important also, and it really talks about harming future innovation. And I can go on about this, but lucky for you all, Michael's going to go on about this. So I turn it over to Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. This one's really personal, because it's really about whether future treatments exist. I have myeloma; it's still incurable. There are incredible therapies out there. In fact, since I've been diagnosed, 15 years ago, there's been 14 new therapies, and that's wonderful. But the question is, will the newer ones, will they ever find a cure? Drug development's really expensive. It's a long, risky bet. So many fail. Billions of dollars are used every single year to develop a drug, and some of them just don't work. It just can't make it to market. We don't have to guess of what happens when you cut the return. I'm a big believer as a patient that capitalism's wonderful, but I think there's a point in time somewhere where you need to make sure that things are reined in to make it affordable for the patient. We have the IRA that just went through, and we're going to talk about the IRA price controls that talked about the small molecules. And since 2022, almost 70% drop in the small molecule R&D investment. That's incredible. And there's almost a 38% or maybe 39% decline in industry-sponsored post-approval trials. That's huge for a guy like me. The U.S. Commerce estimates right now that the clinical trial activity is down by almost 75%. And without clinical trials, what's down the road 5, 6, 10 years? If they don't exist, there won't be a new drug. There won't be a cure for myeloma out there without those trials. The lower list price just doesn't mean that you're going to get that list price back to the customer, the guy who stands literally at the pharmacy counter. I just went to pick up some meds yesterday, and the woman in front of me, her copay was $59. Mine was $1.49. I happen to have a generic drug. It was easy. But I think about those folks out there that always constantly have to spend a huge amount of their take-home pay just to be able to afford their drugs. But going back, the lower list price today, might mean a promising treatment or every potential cancer cure never gets out of the lab. And that's something I think we have to think about. I mean, it's really, really important for someone who doesn't have a cure, or the folks out there that have a really, really rare disease. Will they ever be able to find something if we adopt MFN? So I'm going to pass it over to Heidi W. again.
Yeah, and again, thank you for that, Michael. And I appreciate the patient's perspective on that, because we are fully aligned in that regard. Having been in the room many, many times, having to make decisions about which products to actually take through to the clinic, those that have the best potential, but means you have to actually at times make a decision to stop pursuing another product that you were looking at, or another disease state. And those are the realities of it. That's sometimes even without these kinds of pressures, but you add these types of pressures on top of that. And I think what we will see is decidedly fewer products taken into the clinic, fewer products being made available. We're definitely going to see fewer products being made available outside of the US. And maybe that's not patients here concern. Maybe that's not something that you all need to be concerned about. But from the drug company perspective, it is a concern. We develop life-saving treatments and feel an obligation and a responsibility to try and at least provide access to those products elsewhere. But when the government enacts policy like this, we have to react. And Michael's analogy about the IRA and the small molecule products, something that was perceived to be a very small difference in how small molecules were going to be viewed vis-a-vis biologics has had an enormous impact on the willingness or the ability, really, of pharmaceutical companies to actually pursue additional new small molecules. So I think that's something that really ultimately is in something that the patients really need to take into consideration. We have an interesting little analogy, I think, that we would like to posit just to see if maybe you can start thinking about it in a slightly different way. I'm going to say something very unpopular, which is, it is true, and Sue did say this from the beginning, that we do actually, the US does subsidize drug discovery and development for the rest of the world. It's been this way for a very, very long time. And that's the reality. And we're talking about the reasons why that is. Other countries, I truly can tell you, do not value innovation the way that the US does and has. And so is that okay? Is that not okay? I think the president is taking, I think, what is a reasonable concept that we pay more than other countries, but potentially looking at it a little askew. Rather than punish the patients and the drug industry for those discrepancies, I think more should be done to actually work with other countries to ensure that they're paying their fair share of the value that the industry is creating for patients globally. There endeth my rant. But if we look at, this is a great little analogy, which is if you look at even just car buying, right? If we're going to purchase a car, we know that there's obviously the sticker price. And does everyone pay the sticker price? Fools like me, yes, I tend to, because I don't necessarily, interestingly enough, I don't like to bargain on my own behalf, but I love to bargain on behalf of patients. But in general, a lot of folks will actually take the time and negotiate an ultimate sales price that is less than the sticker price. And so, that's up to the individual. It's up to the actual dealership as to whether or not they'll sell the car for that amount. But if a law was enacted that mandated that if one dealership sold the car for, X amount less, that then no other car could be sold for more than that, it's going to start this very negative reaction in terms of the availability of cars that you might be interested in purchasing. And then also manufacturers will start looking at what are the cars that make most sense to actually manufacture. And so I think clearly the cars that are the least popular, even though some people want them, there won't be enough incentive really for those manufacturers to make them. I represented a company that focused mostly on orphan products, and orphan products, as most of you know, mean that they're for very small patient populations, which generally translated into the products that we were developing were higher cost because there were so few patients that needed them. So from a budget perspective, from a global budget perspective, the impact was small, but the sticker shock of the cost of those products tended to be very high. And it was very difficult to get governments to appreciate Small budget impact, yes, high sticker shock, but also these could be life-saving. There just is a mentality, though, that we don't want to pay those high prices, that we'd rather pay low prices for something that big percentages of the population can actually access, that may or may not be life-saving or may or may not work, versus focusing on the diseases where very few people have them. It's very, very frustrating. So I think that this analogy, imperfect for sure, but is a good way to kind of think about how this actually works and what some of the potential actual, consequences could be. Next slide. Great. So, what can we do? What can we do about this? Let's hand it over to Priscilla, our illustrious leader of MPLB, and she's really going to talk about the kinds of things that we can do to champion this. And I've been kind of moving and pushing our panelists quickly because we do want to actually leave time for Q&A, because I think this is a complicated topic. Lots of questions I hope you have so that we can spend some time answering them. So, but for now, Priscilla.
Thanks so much, Heidi, and thank you to all of you for your input and your experiences and your expertise in doing this. I will say I thought I was responding to all of you in the chat, so you are not seeing my responses, I just realized. We are trying to fix that on our end. But in the meantime, when we talk about how can we actually fix affordability here in the United States, I think we are all aware, Michael spoke to it, just an experience yesterday. We all see it every time we go to the pharmacy counter. The fact that there are very simple affordability reforms that would directly lower cost for people at the pharmacy counter. So what are we talking about? We're talking about policies like capping out-of-pocket cost, ensuring that drugs are covered from the first day of the plan year. So basically from January. What we mean by that is that these drugs would then not be subject to a deductible. A patient wouldn't have to spend a certain amount until their drug actually gets covered. That then your drug would be covered by your insurance from the first day from January 1. We should make sure that, and we didn't get into this, and we have on other webinars, but there are a lot of people in our supply chain here in the US that do not exist in other countries. We know them all as middlemen, but we're talking about insurance companies and pharmacy benefit managers or PBMs, drug wholesalers. There's all sorts of people that make money off of medicine here in the US. But what that means is there are a lot of existing discounts and rebates that, for whatever reason, patients in the US are not necessarily getting access to, meaning when they're paying out of pocket for their medicine, they're paying the full list price, when in reality, their insurance company and their PBM are paying a highly discounted amount. The patient's cost should be based on that discounted amount, just like it is when you go to the hospital or you go to the doctor. That's not how it operates at the pharmacy. We can fix that. There's a way to do that. We need to streamline things like prior authorization. You hear about this a lot. The patients are put through a significant number of barriers in order to even access their medicines here. And there's so many things that can be done to fix that process. Elected officials have said they care about these things. There are policies that exist. So, we want to continue to keep the pressure on them about that. Opposing other policies like MFN and other international reference pricing proposals that would undermine investment, slow drug development, restrict access, and again, with actually not saving patients money. And we have a letter that you can sign on. We launched it today, where we are encouraging the administration and members of Congress to oppose this policy. We'll have a link on the next page where you can see that. And then when we say end global free riding, so in other areas, I know there was a question in the chat about whether MFN applies to things like defense and technology and consumer goods. It does not. And the reality is, and very often, the way that we put pressure on other countries to pay their fair share for any type of good is through trade, where we say, you need to pay your fair share on all of these other things. If not, we're going to investigate and hold you accountable via tariffs. And unfortunately, we don't do that with drugs. And we very much could. There is an effort to push this. We've seen some progress in the UK, for example, that it would say to these other, especially, and to be clear, I'm talking about wealthy countries, that this would be, you are basically taking advantage of all of the innovation that's happening and not paying your fair share while US patients are struggling. So it's on you to do that. So we can go to the next slide.
But Priscilla, can I just add one thing to that comment, which is, I mean, one of the things we've tried to make clear to the trade office is also think about what other countries value, because a couple of us have said here that other countries don't value medication the way that we value medication here, but yet we're trying to kind of go medication to medication, country against country. And if we don't have the same, value proposition, that's part of why we're not doing as well. So I think we need to start looking at other types of products. Like the United States is a leader in manufacturing machinery. Other countries, especially many in Europe, rely on the US for manufacturing machinery. Is there a way to leverage other product areas and the trade that we do in other product areas to negotiate around how we do drug pricing?
Absolutely. There are many potential entry points for those discussions. And it speaks to what I mentioned earlier, which is that this policy punishes patients by trying to punish the pharmaceutical industry when it's really, the need is to really engage the other countries through trade and diplomacy in terms of those patients benefiting from innovation coming from here, and the free riding really is causing lots of disparities and concerns. So I think that's such an important point, Sue, that there are other ways to tackle this. But the whole point here, and what NPLB is really about, is even this policy. I'm upset about it, but it doesn't do anything. It does nothing to help the affordability issues that patients actually face. And we can lower our price, still won't help the patient, but it will mean fewer products in the pipeline, decisions to not launch in other countries and continents, as Heidi says. So I think your involvement is critical, and I don't think the message you're hearing is protect the pharmaceutical industry. That's not the message here. The message is really about affordability. Before we get to Q&A, I would love to just ask the panelists, and Heidi Floyd in particular, because you and Michael both have really been on the front lines of dealing with this. And so I'd love to just get some final thoughts from the three of you, actually, before we head off before we entertain some questions.
Yeah, I'll jump in and start if it's all right with everybody. For me, I think that the key is we're at risk. We're at danger of losing momentum. There's no shame in being the premier country who does this research and development, who's willing to take the risks, who goes out there, because in the end, all the people that are out there trying new things, being inventive and curious with these drugs, they're doing it because they want to save our lives. And so that pipeline of compassion is quite beautiful. And there's no shame in saying, yeah, somebody's got to be inventive and creative, and why can't it be us? But we don't want to lose that momentum, and we shouldn't punish the people who are doing that, nor should we punish the people who need them to keep doing it. It's a beautiful tapestry. I think we all should work together, and the more people that get in the middle to try to stop that, that's problematic. We just have to find as many different ways as possible to encourage this research and development all the way through to the patient, to get it in the patient's hands.
So yeah, I'm going to hop in next after that. And I think what's really important to remember from the patient point of view and the consumer is that our insurance in America is designed exactly what it is. It's a for-profit industry, and it really shouldn't be a for-profit industry. I mean, that's just the bottom line there. And But until that gets fixed and we change how we have a payer system, there's so many other things that we can do out there by advocating, going to speak and share your voice and talk to your congressmen and your senators about different laws. There's multiple things out there. The Clinical Trial Modernization Act, the Senior Timely Access to Care, which would limit prior authorizations. The Help Copays Act, so that the copay accumulators don't exist for the patient. There is multiple things we can do now, because I don't see fixing insurance until much later. It's a bigger issue. But at this point, it's like what do they say about it? Elephant, pick off little pieces at a time, and pick those little pieces to make it better and more affordable for patients.
And I would just add that I think the patient advocacy community and caregiver advocacy community just needs to focus a bit more on this together as a group, to really let the administration know. I mean, the selling point is that it's going to lower our costs. We know that that's not the case. And we all care about affordability. I've never met a patient advocacy group that doesn't care about affordability. So if the administration and members of Congress want to have a conversation about that, we would love to be at the table with them to talk about it. Priscilla went through a couple of different ideas. There are multiple ideas. And then the last thing is, I just want to remind folks that in the Medicare program alone, drug expenses make up about 11% of total program costs. So there's a lot of other pieces of that pie that you can whack at. We're not saying we don't care about affordability and prescription drugs. We supported caps. We work all the time on these issues. But we are also getting a little sick of drug pricing all the time. So let's look at other aspects of healthcare. I mean, it's really total costs of care that patients and families care about.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it is true that pharmaceuticals represent such a small percentage of Medicare spend, but also overall healthcare spend in the U.S. Yet a disproportionate amount of policy is focused here versus on hospitals, insurance, physicians, et cetera. So a very good point. Priscilla, you have some very specific suggestions here.
I do. I do want to jump on the point that was just made, though. And when it comes to medicines, the prices eventually go down. So drugs become generics. Over 90% of the drugs dispensed in the United States are generic medicines. That is how the process works. You have a drug on patent for approximately 13, 14 years. And then that price drops and other generic competition enters the market. The last I checked, there are no generic knee replacements. There are no generic heart transplants. There are no generic hospital procedures. Costs do not go down in other parts of our healthcare system. They only go up. And it's why drugs maintain a stable share of spending, despite how it's talked about. And I think that is a critical component here that is often failed. But that's a whole separate webinar.
Exactly. I was going to say, it's notable also that there's not a robust generics industry in Europe or
right. So there are not, and the generics in Europe are actually more expensive than they are in the United States, which I don't think is what we want to have happen. So in any event, we would love for you to join our fight on this issue. We launched a letter today that is meant explicitly for patients, patient organizations, family caregivers. And, that is very specifically because we want these voices to be heard. As you may know, No Patient Left Behind represents a broad coalition of groups, including folks like Heidi, who work in the small biotech space, in the large biotech space. We represent investors and providers and all sorts of people. But this letter is very much, we want to have patient voices on it. Sue has joined us. Our PAC members have joined us, including Michael and Heidi and the many others who are on this webinar today. And we would love to have your voice added to that. Again, support Common Sense Solution. Contact your members of Congress about the devastating effects of MFN and why that would be bad. Ask them to prioritize out-of-pocket caps on drugs to make sure that our copays are going towards our out-of-pocket maximums, all of these things that there are so many different policies. The thing I would say is to learn more about those. We are members, and many folks on this are members of a coalition called Loop, which is lower out of pockets, and strongly recommend you take a look. That is a fantastic organization driving a lot of these policies. Be an informed consumer. It's very easy to say, wait, you want to control prices? Obviously, you want to set the price. Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it. Always ask the question, lower for whom and with what trade-offs. We have a resource hub that you can go check out, join as a first responder to MPLB, and please follow us on social media. And with all of that, again, all of this stuff will be available on our resource center, but want to also open it up to everyone on the call for any questions. We have a couple in the chat. And so I might just read those out, Heidi, and then if you want to manage who can answer them. So I mentioned there was a question about, does this apply to other areas? No, it does not. We just got a question about what are the chances of reopening the IRA? That seems like a very popular choice by a number of folks, but happy to turn that over to you, Heidi, or other panelists on that.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, I think it makes sense, and we've been trying. There are some things that we actually supported within the IRA, but the particular provision that we all mentioned is something that we've been trying to actually correct. And it's interesting to us also that MFN was proposed when in fact the IRA had been introduced, and there was a real effort within the Medicare program to try and actually at least set up a system where there was more ability to negotiate on some of those costs. It's a political issue. This year, no way, right? I mean, it's the midterms, nothing's going to happen. But whoever asked the question, I think it is the logical piece of legislation to try and open up. So I think that it's a point well made, and something that this coalition will continue to focus on. But I don't know, Michael, you're very active, as are you, Sue. Any thoughts on your end?
I think, as you mentioned, it's an election year, the midterms. I don't think anyone's going to focus on the IRA this year. There has been a fair amount of talk about it, though, in the advocacy world to get that changed. So I think maybe somewhere down the road it will happen. It's just going to be a matter of time, like all things.
Agreed.
And I think there's two different types of reopening the IRA. So there's reopening the IRA to fix some of the problems in it, and then there's reopening the IRA to expand it to more drugs, to the private market. So there are good things and bad things about reopening and I don't know if we actually told people what IRA stands for, which is Inflation Reduction Act. You may all remember that from the summer of 2022. And there are really great things about that law. It provided a $2,000 out-of-pocket cap in Medicare Part D, the Medicare drug program, which is the most popular part of the law and the most impactful part of it, frankly, for patients.
I think you raise a really important point too, that I'd like to share with the advocates, which is, I remember years ago being so heavily involved in healthcare reform, and you too, Priscilla, and just being asked by my companies, well, when will it be done? And the answer is it'll never be done.
Never.
Because we have a system that is going to be constantly evolving to address whatever issues are raised, but also innovation, in science and in technology. And so while we're asking you to really think about engaging on this issue, my plea is that you just stay engaged, because there's going to be other issues that come up, and there'll be similar takes on old policy, new ideas, that sort of thing. But we're not, and it's healthy to be in a constant state of massaging and growth and policy development.
And we'll be here to help
exactly
explain that. There was another question about the effort to have other countries pay higher prices. Has that worked? Is it working? I'm happy to answer this one unless others want to jump in.
I'll just say from my perspective, no, it hasn't worked, clearly. And I don't think we actually as a country have really tried hard enough to do that. I think we've kind of allowed the free riding to continue, and, and that's partly what's led to this where we are today. But again, I think we have multiple levers, and Sue, your comments here are helpful, to really have those discussions via trade discussions. And it really is critical that if in fact we all value innovation and we want our patient populations to be healthy, then we all have a responsibility to step up for those patient populations.
Yeah, I mean, there have been, I think the person asked specifically about the deal with the UK, and there have been several stories now in The Guardian basically saying that, okay, yeah, the UK may, have agreed to this deal, and we'll see it in some select medications. We're going to have to cut some senior services, some other aspects of our healthcare pie in order to meet this. So it kind of goes again to the value equation and whether or not there are other areas that we can look at where the UK values more than they do with medications because they'll play along. And it's just sort of like, is that the US's role? Now we're sort of playing with other countries' healthcare systems. And I don't feel good about that as an American taxpayer. I don't.
Oh, no, but I don't think it doesn't take us revising their systems as much as getting them to view, drug funding differently. Maybe they won't. I don't know. But one of the things I think other countries really could benefit from too is also what you guys are all great at, which is patient advocacy. And so I think really the patients need to be heard.
Yeah. One additional point, I think we talk a lot about how this type of policy would affect people with rare disease and chronic conditions and others. Quite frankly, yes, that's true. Those folks would be overwhelmingly impacted, but it actually affects everybody. You don't know when you're going to become a patient, and you don't know what medicine is not going to be developed. So it could very well be for a very common problem. I think there are so many different aspects. I just recently was talking to a company about treatment resistant hypertension or high blood pressure. That is a huge problem. But if there isn't the return on investing in creating that drug, how would that get made? So I do think it's very important for us to really think about the broader issue here. Certainly, this ends up hitting people who have existing chronic diseases and rare diseases and especially hard earlier, but I would say it hits everyone. It looks like we have one question. Yes, we do have some challenges with people not being aware of the $2,000 out-of-pocket max in Medicare. However, it's automatically applied. I think, interestingly, that is the one area of the law that is actually going quite well, and we will see how other things. And yeah,
what Priscilla? Oh,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, guys. I just wanted to answer. I think the question is around the Medicare prescription payment program, which is the smoothing
program. Yeah, nobody knows about that.
And that is a very low uptake. You're correct. My group, the Alliance for Aging Research, has been working on that a lot. We actually did get some report language into appropriations the last couple of years to push the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which runs the Medicare program, to have more transparency around public reporting of where folks are signing up for it. Because you have to do it within 24 hours, you have to call your payer directly. You can't do sign up at the pharmacy counter. We're trying to fix that piece. So there's a lot of efforts around that going on. MapRx, which is a coalition a number of groups are a part of, is working on that, as is the Alliance. And if you want to reach out to us, we're at info@agingresearch.org. We're happy to get you involved.
Thanks for catching that, Sue. Yeah, I missed the smoothing question. Yeah.
Of time, but I did see a little question come through about, well, if the EU did pay more, could we actually lower prices here? And I think the answer to that is yes. I think companies look at it globally, and if you look back to the car analogy, when you have numbers you have to meet, and if certain people only pay this much, then other people have to pay this much. So if that were a little bit more equal around the country, I think that it would ease some of the pressures on the U.S. But that's not what this policy does. So, but before we leave, I just wanted to thank all of our guests. It's great to have such. I'm very excited about the interest in the participation, and I hope that you do actually follow us on MPLB and join other webinars. And I also just want to thank our tremendous panel of experts, Heidi Floyd, Michael Riato, and Sue Peshin. You guys have been terrific. You guys are great to work with. And I think your insights have just been invaluable here. So thank you very much.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Heidi.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Thanks
much.
everyone for
Take
joining.
care.